Hey y'all, it's Mallory Hagan, co host of the Pretty Furious podcast, where we talk about everything from headlines to heated rivalry. Join us on Monday, January 19th for our fascinating episode with He's Not Wrong host Chad Dubois. We're talking about Alabama Power, Public Service Commission, and Chad's take on the 2016 trend. Listen Monday, January 19th, everywhere you get your podcasts, or visit us at prettyfuriouspod.com.
Hey everyone, welcome to a new episode of He's Not Wrong. I'm your host, Chad D. This episode is going to sound like it is centered and focused on Alabama, and you will be correct if that is how you feel, but I have a lot of listeners that spans the entirety of the United States of America, and we also have a good bit of listeners who are listening abroad, so even though this episode is focused on Alabama, I need you to think a little bit beyond what this episode is presenting because, yes, this is an episode that is focused on Alabama Power, Energy Alabama, and issues that people in this state are facing, but they're issues that a lot of energy monopolies across the United States and a lot of people in other states are facing. So if you can hear about the issues here and hear about the things and listen to the things that we are presenting as solutions, things that we are doing to go to our legislators to advocate for certain solutions to the issues that are being faced here, it might be able to help you in your state move the needle a little bit on issues as it relates to energy. So listen, I recorded an episode with Mallory and Maggie from the Pretty Furious podcast that will be released tomorrow, Monday, January 19th, as you heard before the intro music played. So if you're listening to this episode on Sunday, release day, that's tomorrow. If you're listening to this episode after January 19th, the episode on Pretty Furious is already out and you should go give it a listen because we dive deep into politics of Alabama Power and the Public Service Commission here in the state, using my experience in energy advocacy in Alabama as a starting point for a broader conversation, like I said, about affordability and energy efficiency. No matter what state you're listening from, the discussion is relevant. It offers a useful framework for how to think about energy policy and the role of elected officials and how the energy sector impacts everyday costs. With that being said, I think of my episode on Pretty Furious and the episode you're listening to right now on He's Not Wrong as sister episodes. The conversation here is more focused on policy and advocacy work from an energy nonprofit in Alabama. We go deep into the details on the issues people need to understand to be informed and engaged. So today I'm joined by Daniel Tait, the Executive Director of Energy Alabama, to talk about why so many Alabamians are struggling with sky-high power bills and why the system feels deliberately unclear. We get into how rates are set without public rate cases, why fuel costs are adjusted behind closed doors, and how the Public Service Commission's decisions cripple household budgets across the state. We also talk about energy burden, consumer protections, barriers to solar energy, and long-term risks of doubling down on coal and gas while our neighboring states move forward with clean energy. Our conversation is all about accountability. It's about transparency and what it would actually look like to build an energy system that works for the people, not just for utilities. And we also obviously cover a whole lot more than that in the hour that I had with Daniel. So without further ado, I give you my conversation with Executive Director of Energy Alabama, Daniel Tait. Daniel Tait, welcome to He's Not Wrong. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. How are you doing?
Hanging in there. I'm doing well. Appreciate you for having me.
You're the Executive Director for Energy Alabama. So before we get into this episode, if you could just give us the lay of the land with the mission of Energy Alabama, that would be amazing.
Yeah, Energy Alabama was created, we're a nonprofit organization and we were created to advocate for clean and affordable energy here in the state of Alabama. So we really spend most of our time working on education. And so that's with students in schools and with communities out there talking about things like energy efficiency, renewable energy, how to save on your utility bill. And then another side of our house does policy work. And that is things like trying to pass good legislation at the State House that helps people, how to get things done at the Public Service Commission that help people. So we're trying everything we can, in terms of state government, local government and a utility policy to make bills more affordable, and also to make our energy supply, our energy system cleaner.
My audience has heard this story a lot, but just for the sake of what the first question that I have, for the sake of it, I'm going to tell the story again. But last January, I had an over $500 power bill that was just shocking to see. And my heat was never set above 55 degrees. So I was freezing, my toes were numb, and yet I still had a $500 power bill, and it was just insane. And so receiving that, something I've never received before, just made me feel so bad for people who were in situations like mine where they were getting those power bills, but they might not be able to afford them. And so I started looking into things that they could do to receive help for their energy bills, looking into things that Alabama Power might do to help people who can't afford their bills. And then I started to see that there was a major lack of programs to help people who were in situations like mine. And I was lucky. I'm privileged to where that power bill hurt, but I didn't have to choose between medication and paying my bill, which is something that a lot of people in this state, they've been talking to me on social media, a lot of people are having to do. And so then that really got me into doing deep dives into the work that Energy Alabama is doing, and ways that people can educate themselves on how to really be more energy efficient in the state. And so I want to speak to energy prices first, because it's something that I feel like a lot of people don't know about, how their electric rates are determined. And Alabama Power hasn't had a rate review in over 4 decades, I believe, since the early 1980s.
That's correct.
Yeah.
1982.
And they use a formula now called a rate stabilization and equalization formula to determine our rates. Can you speak to that and what that means?
Yeah, so Alabama Power uses this RSC, which is kind of what we would call a formula rate, which just means that every year they take new numbers to the Public Service Commission, and the formula spits out a new rate, and then that's what they charge you. That's not the common practice in the vast majority of the states around the country. So they have a rate review, sometimes referred to as a rate case or an audit. And a Public Service Commission's job is to actually open the books. Again, we should step back and help folks understand that the reason that we do this in almost every state in the union is because these companies are monopolies that do not have competitive pressures of the market. You cannot pick up and just say, well, you know what, that $550 bill from Alabama Power was out of control, and I'm going to go buy from Daniel Tait Energy LLC. It doesn't work that way, right? So you have to have a regulator, and in this case, it's the Public Service Commission, to hold the monopoly to account to make sure that the rates are fair. So that's the process that's not happening in Alabama, is that rate review, that audit. And most times utilities will have to come in front of their regulators every 2 to 3 years and open their books, actually testify under oath, just like it is a legal case in front of a court, and say, this is what we need to do, and we need your approval to do X, Y, and Z. And then groups like Energy Alabama, or large manufacturers or consumer advocates, all argue at the Public Service Commission and say, well, we think they're asking for too much, and this, and this. And then the Public Service Commission is supposed to decide and say, well, we decide that Alabama Power is right on these issues, and Energy Alabama is right on these issues, and Mercedes is right on these issues, and here's our decision. And none of that happens in Alabama, and has not happened since 1982. The last thing I'll say on that real quickly is that because of that, a lot of the things that we deal with today are relics of the early 1980s. Things that might have been normal then are definitely not normal practice today. And what I'm referring to there is the absurdly high allowed profit of Alabama Power. That was actually kind of a common rate back then in the 1980s, but has not been updated since.
Hearing all of that, I can't help but think that the Public Service Commission is just like rubber stamping whatever is being brought to them, and they're not protecting consumers. From your perspective, from what you've seen in the work that you do, is this an attempt, and correct me if my question is misaligned with what reality is, but is it an attempt to avoid tough questions on finances from Alabama Power? Like what would they be trying to hide from their books being opened and from the public being able to have input on what's going on behind the scenes?
I think there's probably two things that are happening there. One, and most obvious, is that they're making a boatload of money. Like their profits are absolutely through the roof. And so they don't want to crack open any system that has delivered the high level of consistent profitability that they've had for the last 4 decades. So that's probably the number one motivator. The second thing is, and I can't speak exactly to their motivation,
Sure.
but when you don't crack open your books like this under oath for 4 decades, what's in there? We have no idea. I mean, I don't know exactly what is specific line items that may be wrong or should be disallowed, but that's kind of part of the point of a rate review of an audit. And so I think it's highly likely that over 4 decades of not having your books open, there might be some skeletons in those books that they don't want to talk about, and
Sure.
that could be a motivator for them not to open it as well.
One thing that I appreciate Energy Alabama doing is making sure that every day Alabamian has a seat at the table where decisions are being made. Y'all are fighting for the seat at that table. I say that because the Public Service Commission has not held public hearings on Alabama Power's fuel cost adjustments in 16 years. And even though those fuel rates have been tweaked, I believe 18 times, there's been no public participation. And in fact, Energy Alabama made an attempt to intervene in those proceedings and y'all were denied. And I know that that's been appealed and all of that. But what's at stake for everyday Alabamians if groups like yours can't have a seat at the table where these decisions are being discussed and made?
Basically, just means that the power company, Alabama Power, can do whatever it wants with no recourse. There are, and it's not just us, right? It should be that any ratepayer, any customer of Alabama Power, whether residential or commercial or industrial, should have equal rights to intervene in these proceedings. And so the proceeding that you're talking about there is what's called rate ECR, or energy cost recovery. So your bill is actually made up of a handful of different rates. And rate ECR is the rate that they use to charge you for fuel. So, when they go buy coal, gas, uranium, things like that, they pass along that cost to you on your bill, and you're charged through rate ECR. Our attempt to intervene in that docket was really about, are customers getting the best deal for fuel? Should the rate for rate ECR be lower than it currently is? And when a group like ours, or for that matter, any other group or person that intervenes, you get full status, right? I and Energy Alabama would get the ability to ask questions of Alabama Power under oath that they would have to, respond to and say, this is what we're doing with the money, and this is how it's being spent. We think that's a pretty fair and reasonable thing that a monopoly should have to do. So that's kind of what's at stake. And the thing I'll say about rate ECR that maybe a lot of people don't know, and I don't have the exact number off the top of my head right now, but it's a pretty sizable portion of your bill, right? So about 20 to 30% of your bill is just the cost of fuel. So us intervening and trying to get answers about this particular rate is not just some random part of your bill that accounts for 50 cents or $1 a month. I mean, it is, adds up to a
Yeah.
good number of what you pay every month. So it's very substantial.
And speaking about the breakdown of a bill, Energy Alabama just recently released a bill calculator that shows consumers where their money goes. And it revealed that roughly 26% of typical Alabama power bills, it's pure profit for the company. When you include taxes on that profit, over a third of your bill is going toward the company's earnings and related taxes. What was the goal of this calculator? What was it, just trying to like shock people into realizing, whoa, like this is a problem? Or like, what do you want? What did you want consumers to learn from this tool about why their power bills are so high?
I mean, I'm going to be honest. When I did the numbers ourselves, we never really even intended to create a calculator, but we calculated it ourselves and went, "Holy hell, this is higher than we thought." Even
Yeah.
I've been at this for over a decade, and even I didn't think it was going to be that bad, but it was. And so I think when I saw the numbers and realized how shocking they were, I thought, well, I think most Alabama Power customers would be shocked to understand and see that one third of every dollar they give to the power company has nothing to do with keeping the lights on. It's for profits. It's for paying taxes on profits, which is also another kind of
Yeah.
shocking revelation. But I think the bigger point of the calculator, beyond the fact of teaching people, showing people exactly how much is going to profit, is that it helps identify and show to people that the big drivers of your bill, right? When you pay a $550 bill and 30% of that is profit, that's something that doesn't need to be that high, right? It starts to show and put real numbers to, hey, if we brought their profit down to a reasonable level, how much could I actually save as a customer? We're talking, $20, $25 for every 1,000 kilowatt hours, a, a lot of money. And then it also, the tool, we built it to show things like the fuel and the power plants and things like that, because we wanted people to understand, when you give a dollar to Alabama Power, what are you really paying for? And I don't think that most people understood or knew exactly what they were getting or supposed to be getting in return. And our hope is this really starts a conversation about what should you be getting for that dollar? It's obviously not what we're currently getting, but
Yeah.
what should the answer be?
I made a video about that calculator and it kind of took off, and people were shocked when they went to the site and realized how much of their bill was going to profit, or to Alabama Power's profits, I should say. But that I want to play devil's advocate for a minute, because
Sure.
I don't want people to hear what we were saying about their books aren't open, we don't know about their finances, and then assume, okay, well, that calculator's not accurate, because how can you calculate something that you don't have insight into? So how did that calculator come to be? How certain are you of the percentages that it spits back out when you put in your bill?
We used a filing from the Public Service Commission, or that Alabama Power makes with the Public Service Commission every year, in order to look at the top line financials. So when we say that their books aren't open and nobody knows exactly what they're spending, we're talking about the details. We do know high level things that Alabama Power has to report to the Public Service Commission, or for that matter, to federal regulators with the Securities and Exchange Commission, because it's a publicly traded corporation as part of Southern Company. So we do know things like, how much revenue do they make? How much profit do they make? How much do they spend on fuel? We do know things like that, but we don't know the line items under those high level categories. And we also don't know things that go into those high level numbers. So that's kind of the detail that you get in a rate case, is like, well, did you take a bunch of lobbying expenses and categorize those as operations and maintenance that went into the fuel rate? Maybe, maybe not. We don't know. Like, that's the type of thing that would come out in a rate case to say, well, that's not really fuel. That shouldn't be allowed. So there are some, we're trusting that these numbers are accurate from Alabama Power to the Public Service Commission. And we use those numbers to create this kind of top line calculator of, this is what the power company is saying that they're spending your money on. And the calculator spits that out.
One thing that I did not know until I started looking into Energy Alabama and started doing more research after I received that insane bill last year, is the fact that Alabama ranks at the top in the nation for energy burden, meaning that Alabamians spend the highest share of their income on electricity and gas bills. And we, I believe, are number 4 in having the highest monthly power bills in the country. What I'm curious about now is, are there any consumer protections or policies that Energy Alabama is advocating for or believes that is needed to alleviate this burden? And I ask that from an advocacy standpoint because I want people to know exactly what things that they should be fighting for. It's one thing to say, hey, my power bill's too high. I don't like corporations that screw over the little man, but it's another to equip people with the things that they should be looking into and asking local leaders or even going directly to Alabama Power and saying, we need this and we deserve this. And so what are some of those protections and policies that you'll advocate for?
Yeah, so I'll give you and your listeners and viewers here a little bit of a sneak peek, because coming up this week, a little bit later, we are going to be releasing a utility affordability platform. So we want to get out there and show people, here are the 6 things that legislators, regulators, decision makers can do right now that would lower power bills. And we're talking about billions of dollars over the next decade. These are big savings. Some of those things are, and probably the most impactful is one we've already talked about, just getting the profit in line. Looking at what is a fair and reasonable profit compared to some other utilities around the country. That alone can save customers about $400 million dollars a year. That's about $20 to $25 a month for every 1,000 kilowatt hours. And listen, if you're getting a bill of $550, you're using a lot more than 1,000 kilowatt hours. So those savings are higher the higher the bill is because it's a bigger portion. So yeah, number one is obviously a profit issue. There are other policies that we're going to be talking about or other actions that government can take that people may have heard of or some that they may have not. So one that maybe we'll talk a little bit about later today is repealing the solar tax and other
Yep.
taxes and fees that penalize people for producing their own power. Listen, I've seen your comments or comments on your posts that you've made, and we've got them from Energy Alabama, where people are fed up and they're thinking about, well, maybe I should just generate our own power. Well, guess what? Alabama Power's already thought of that, and they're going to make sure to tax the hell out of you and make sure you can't do that and stay dependent on them too. So we really got to fix that issue of getting the solar tax and other fees out of the way so that if people want to be self-reliant, they want to take some control in their own hands, they have the ability to do that. Another issue that's top of mind for a lot of people right now are the issues of data centers and large loads, and how do those affect power bills. And so we would like to see the legislature pass a bill that would protect consumers so that data centers, or for that matter, really large loads like big factories and things that are coming onto the grid, don't actually negatively impact regular consumers or small mom and pop businesses. There are no protections for that right now in Alabama. We just kind of have to trust the power company that they're doing the right thing, and wink, wink, nod, nod, that they're not hosing regular customers. I have my suspicions that that's not the case.
Sure.
So we'd like to see a bill that does that. Um, there's a few other things in that agenda that we'll be talking a little bit about. Things like, there's federal money available for energy efficiency. The state of Alabama just needs to release and needs to use. Like, let's get on it. Put the money to good use. Things like, there was actually a really good bill that passed last session called the Powering Growth Act that would provide lower cost state financing for energy related projects compared to the more expensive Wall Street backed equity that Alabama Power typically uses. And so there's, now a new mechanism in Alabama to try to make the investments that we do need to make them cheaper than we would if investors from Alabama Power paid for it. So that's not everything that's on the agenda, but
Sure.
there's just, a handful of things here that could really make a big difference. Oh, I lied. There is one more I want to say, if you don't mind, and that
Yeah,
is
go.
getting political costs out of your bill. We would love to see a bill passed in Alabama that prohibits Alabama Power from charging customers for any part of its political operation. If they want to engage in lobbying and other types of political activities, that's great. Their shareholders should pay for it, not regular people. That shouldn't be part of your utility bill.
So is that confirmed, or is that, since there's no oversight into it, we're assuming that the lobbying, that all of that stuff is being taxed on or put on? I call it a tax because that's essentially what it is, but it's being put on to the consumers. How would we find that out? Is that where the Public Service Commission comes in and they do a rate review? That's how we would find out exactly how much lobbying money is going on, being passed on to consumers, if it is.
Yeah, that's right. So Public Service Commission needs to do its job. And listen, I'll tell you a couple of things. Do we know the exact number or amount of all these different political activities that Alabama Power is doing? No, we don't. We do know, however, that they have admitted, as I've asked questions to at the Public Service Commission meetings over the last few years, that some of these costs are indeed, they have admitted to us that some of them are getting charged to customers. So,
Oh my God.
like the Alabama News Center, they claim that's for your educational benefit. So they run their own news site and they charge you for some of that and things of that nature. Some of them they've already admitted. And then the second thing I'll say is that Alabama is not unique here, or Alabama Power is not unique
Sure.
in that a monopoly utility wants to try to sneak in political costs to your bill. This happens all over the country. And there have been a spate of pieces of legislation all across the country or actions by public service commissions, some of them in red states, to take action to try to quell this activity. Because whether you're Republican or Democrat, I don't think either side of the aisle really wants their money that's supposed to keep the lights on going to fund politics of any sort.
Yeah.
That's not the job of the ratepayer. So there have been states that have done this, and when they've passed those bills or when they've taken those regulatory actions, they're catching millions and millions of dollars of political expenses in those other states. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, while I can't prove a specific number,
Sure.
it stands to reason that if other states are catching millions of dollars and our state hasn't had a rate review in 40 years, I would be absolutely shocked if there's not a sizable amount of political activity snuck into your bill and it doesn't belong there.
No, it doesn't. And I want to circle back on one of those policy points that you spoke about, because I didn't know this until you told me. The Energy Savings Fund from the Federal Energy Efficiency Funds, $150 million that you referenced, has that been handed over? Is that literally just sitting in a bank account in Montgomery? Or is that like,
We don't we don't exactly know. We've been trying to get a good answer out of ADECA, Alabama Department of Economic and Community Affairs, who would be the state-based agency that would administer those funds. And I'll be honest with you, they've been giving us crickets. We've even heard that state legislators have been trying to get answers out of ADECA, and they can't get answers out of ADECA. So all we know is that other states, including Georgia, by the way, did receive their federal funding and have active programs that are running right
yeah,
now. So, a lot of programs were rolled back under this administration, but this one survived. And Georgia is out there giving rebates to regular people for making improvements to their homes. Meanwhile, Alabamians are getting $550 bills in the mail, and our state government is doing absolutely nothing to get that money out to the people who need it.
I wouldn't be shocked if it was just sitting there. The lack of transparency at that level in our state, I feel like is par for the course. And I know this is so far off topic from our energy conversation, but even expanding Medicare and Medicaid in Alabama, that money was allotted to us through Obamacare. And just the fact that it had Obamacare tied to its name, they didn't touch it. And they're saying that the government is going to spend this much money on us. They already spent it. It's sitting there. You just have to use it. You're doing a bigger disservice by sitting on a large sum of taxpayer dollars that's been allocated for something that's supposed to better their lives. And it's just sitting there. It's being wasted. So I would not be shocked if that money is just sitting there and they just don't want us to know it for that reason.
Well, one thing I'm worried about is that if we don't spend it, it's either going to go to another state to help their folks, which great for them, but I want to see Alabamians get that
Sure.
benefit, or it just goes back to the US Treasury. So Alabamians have paid taxes to go into the system to benefit them. And then now when we finally have something that actually could help people, we don't use it and it goes back and taxpayer dollars are just wasted.
Yeah, no, that's horrible. And you brought up that rooftop solar tax. And so I want to go ahead and bring that up because it's something that I don't think a lot of people know about. Actually, I know a lot of people don't know about it because, as you said, a lot of people in my comments are saying, well, we'll just get solar panels. And I have people in my life who are like, well, we're just going to go solar because our power bill is just way too high. I'm like, good luck. Your power bill is going to be just the same because they're going to charge you and tax you for putting solar panels on your house. So can you speak to what that fee is and why they're doing it to people?
Yeah, so this is a solar tax that they charge to just residential and small commercial solar systems that connect to the grid. So to be clear, if you want to go completely off the grid, you can knock yourself out and do it. But this is for people, and this is usually the case, right? Where people still want to maintain a connection to the grid because there's benefit there,
Yeah.
as well as use some solar or battery storage. If you do that, then they are going to charge you a tax. Get a little wonky here with you, but it's $5.41 per kilowatt of installed capacity per month. That is a bunch of wonk speak to say that this is about a 50% tax. So if you put solar on your house, you can expect that about 50% of what you would have earned, if you will, would be taxed away. And sometimes the tax can actually come out to be a little bit higher than that. But nonetheless, it is very, very sizable. It is very effective. I'm not going to lie. Like Alabama Power's attacks on solar are very
Yeah.
effective. If you look at the data, Alabama is way far behind every other state. I mean, even states that look a lot like ours, Mississippi, South Carolina, are just absolutely kicking our asses when it comes to solar. And that is almost entirely because of this tax. So this tax is currently being challenged and litigated in federal court by friends of ours at the Southern Environmental Law Center and GASP, who many of your listeners and viewers may know. So we're cheering them on and hoping that that will get overturned in court. But even beyond that, state legislators or regulators today could take action to get this over with and just repeal it now and not have to wait on the court. So the last thing I want to say about the solar tax, beyond the fact that it's just kind of ridiculous, is when you look at the data of how Alabama Power actually calculated, it's quite hilarious. I'm not going to lie, because they said, well, if the solar is not producing, then we need to provide you energy. So we got to charge you for that, which they already do. And then they do this calculation and they say, essentially, they finally admit that, well, if you have solar, you're buying less power from us than you would if you had solar. So we think that you owe us that money anyways. So that's where the fee comes from. So in our industry, we call that lost revenue, right? Like you install new HVAC that uses less energy, or you install new lighting that is lost revenue to the utility because you're just buying less power from them. So their calculation of the solar fee is almost entirely a function of their lost revenue. So this is just a monopolistic way of saying, well, you bought those fancy solar panels, and I think you should buy that power from me, so I'm going to charge you for it anyways. Another example that I often give, try to help people understand what the power company is doing here is, say you grew your own tomatoes, right? This tax is the equivalent of Publix or Kroger or Walmart saying, well, you stopped buying tomatoes from me, so we're going to add a line item to your monthly grocery bill to add the cost of the tomatoes that you don't buy from us anymore. Like that's absolutely absurd. That would never happen. But that's precisely what is happening with the solar tax and was approved by the Public Service Commission.
I just cannot wrap my head around the fact that if I owned a home and I wanted to be more energy efficient, say I'm trying to save up to have a kid, that's one of the areas where I might be able to save 50, $100 a month to put towards having a kid, because I would have to adopt or have a surrogate. So it'd be really, really expensive. So I'd have to find every little area where I could save. And Alabama Power is just going to come and say, no, no matter what, this is what you're going to pay. And they're going to tell me that I can't be more cost efficient in my own life. Like they've made that decision for me. That pisses me off.
Yeah.
Like
I tell you one thing that is very frustrating for us, right, is that as advocates of clean energy, we want to see people making investments in not just solar, but even more importantly, things like energy efficiency that, help us use less. It's actually the cheapest source of energy and the cleanest source. So it's really frustrating that we have, frankly, a structure, like a business model and a regulatory structure that often makes those types of investment all for naught. And so we see it in our comments, right? And you probably see it too. And it's very frustrating. I understand that there are regular people out there that go, well, why the hell should I invest in insulation or upgrading my HVAC, because the power company is just going to come in and charge me for it anyways? And in many respects, they're right. And that's really frustrating because we want people to do that, but we've got to fix the regulatory environment and the policy environment so that people are actually going to be rewarded for doing the right things, making the investments that help the whole system, as opposed to penalized for corporate gain.
Yeah, I've I would say 95% of my comments are people who are looking for a space to feel heard and seen. And so that 95%, the other 5% I would say are either people who are just trying to play devil's advocate, they're just mean, or they just don't understand the reality that a lot of people in Alabama live in. And a lot of comments that I see from people who don't agree with the other 95% are saying, Well, just insulate your home, just weatherize it. Like if you want a lower power bill, then you have every resource available to you to try to make your home more energy efficient. It's like so many, what's lost on so many people is the fact that this state lacks in so much. And one of those is, or one of those areas is an income equality and just the infrastructure in small towns across the state to allow people to access other areas to get better paying jobs. Like a lot of people can't help the fact that they live in the home or the space that they live in. They can't afford their power bill. So how do you think they're going to afford to weatherize their home or to go get a smart thermostat that might be able to save them $5 a month? Like I feel like lost on so many people, the fact that this is so serious for a lot of people that they can't afford to weatherize their home. They can't afford their power bill. They literally are risking hypothermia each month because they don't want to have to pay a bill that's more than their mortgage. Like it's insane. It is so insane to me. So I want to ask, does Alabama Power have any programs or does the state offer any programs that helps with weatherizing homes or creating a more energy efficient living environment for people if they can't afford their power bill?
Mostly no. So there are federal programs that people may have heard of before. One is called LIHEAP, which is essentially a bill pay assistance program for low income and senior residents that are struggling to pay their bill. So federal money goes to every state in America in order to be able to provide this assistance. So Alabama is no different. And usually when you see things like Governor Ivey grants awards for, low income bill pay assistance, that's what that is. It's actually coming from the federal government and state officials are taking credit for it. But nonetheless, that's what it is. And honestly, even though it's a good program, it's nowhere near right what the actual problem or the scale of the problem is out there. And a little cynical of me, while I think it's a good program and don't want to see people cut off, this is just federal money that goes right into Alabama Power's back pocket. So, of course, the utilities like it because the real problem is the fact that we have housing stock that's completely outdated or inefficient or in a state of disrepair. And so when I say not really, what I mean there is that in many other states, public service commissions or state legislators actually force utilities to make these types of investment because, and this may be shocking to a lot of people, but it is actually cheaper for utilities to make investments in people's houses so that they use less power than it is for them to build new power plants in many cases. So a lot of states do that. They say, listen, if it is cheaper and more cost effective for us to go home by home or apartment by apartment and insulate and air seal and fix HVACs, then we should do that because it is cheaper for the whole system and it would deliver direct value and benefit to people on their monthly bill. We do not do that in Alabama. That is a failure of the Public Service Commission and the legislature in order to force Alabama Power to make those types of investments. So that's kind of one. The second thing that I'd say in terms of a response to this is, and you kind of mentioned it already, is housing stock. But what I think a lot of people don't recognize is not just housing stock or what people live in, is the fact that most people are renters. Like, what would you have them do? Spend $10,000 on an HVAC for a house that they don't own, that they may not live in another couple of years? So a lot of states and a lot of places have started to try to roll out programs that target renters or rental housing, or they provide financing structures so that the upgrades and the benefits stay with the property. So something that some states do is what's called pay as you save, which means investments are made to a property to make it more energy efficient and bring the bills down. And that upgrade cost and benefit stays with the property. So let me give you an example. Chad makes $10,000 of investment. He's going to fix his house up and you're going to finance that through your utility bill. And you're going to pay for that $10,000 with the savings that you accrue. So it's actually structured so that every month your payment is actually less than your energy savings. That way you are always saving money from day one. Now, if you turn around and leave that house, you move 2 years from now and somebody else moves into Chad's house, they pick up where you left off and they keep making the same payments for the upgrades, but they're also still getting the savings from the upgrades that you chose to make. It's an innovative way to try to get upgrades and improvements made to rental housing that have more transient, people coming through every so many years, or frankly, and let's be honest, where we have landlords or yeah, I would just say landlords that don't actually care to make any upgrades in a property because they don't pay the utility bill. Like if you own the
Which
house,
is the
somebody else
situation
is,
I found myself in last
yeah,
January.
yeah. So they're not going to spend money to help you
No.
upgrade that house because it's not their problem. Right. So we need these types of innovative programs or financing structures to get upgrades into the places where the high bills are. I tell you, the vast majority of the really high bills we see are likely in rental houses, they're in mobile homes, they're in older homes. These are not easy problems to solve, but there are solutions out there, and other states are at least trying something.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where we're at in terms of really wanting to see our state government take a leadership role there.
I want to. I'm for just a minute. I want to go back to solar development in the state of Alabama just for a minute because this leads to a larger conversation. I think because we've laid the groundwork for the fact that Alabama Power does. They don't want people to be using solar. They're trying to make it seem less appealing for people. They're trying to keep them with the Alabama Power Company. But to put some numbers behind it from a report that Energy Alabama commissioned just a few years ago. So you tell me if these numbers are still accurate. But Alabama, our electricity, only 0.9% of it came from utility scale solar versus almost 6% in Georgia and 9% in North Carolina. And so the fact that we are so far behind in solar development when even other states are adopting it at a much greater scale, what economic benefits are we missing out on by not embracing more solar and renewable energy development? And I say economic benefits because it seems to me that so many people don't want to have conversations about what can help their neighbor. They only want to have conversations about what might help the economy, whatever that means. If this is a way we can get people to pay attention and focus on what needs to be done, I want to know what Alabama is missing out on by not doing this.
Yeah, I'll say that. So that report we put out late last year is really good in highlighting the difference between where Alabama is versus peers like Georgia or South Carolina that are similar in nature to us, both demographically and politically, and economically for that matter, and kind of what we're missing out on. So I don't
Yeah,
have the specific numbers right in front of me right now,
sure.
but the difference between Alabama and specifically Georgia, which is pretty far ahead of us, and I think North Carolina even more so than Georgia. Is we're talking about thousands and thousands of jobs in terms of people actually working in these industries. But I will say probably the one that excites me the most, to be honest, is the property tax revenue from these facilities, especially in rural areas of the state that desperately need income. And there are just some wonderful stories out of South Georgia where really concerted efforts by rural leaders in counties in southern Georgia really attracted a good bit of solar development in those counties and have made tremendous amount of difference in terms of the amount of taxes going into the budget that is helping to pay for police and fire and school and roads in places where factories may have left and local budgets have been decimated. And so I think it's a real opportunity for many rural places to shore up those budgets. So that's what we tried to look at there. And I will say, just as a point of clarification, because I think it's
Sure.
important for people to know just how behind we are. That number that you quoted for Alabama, I'm pretty sure is all of the state of Alabama. Out of the zero point 0.9 that we do have, the vast majority of that is in North Alabama, where TVA is the major supplier. It is essentially a
Sure.
rounding error to zero for Alabama Power. There's very, very little solar actually on the grid, and what is on the grid is actually dedicated for specific corporate users, not for the benefit of people like me and you. And so to the extent that we have seen things in Alabama happen, we also evaluated in that report the differences between local power companies that are owned by local governments like Athens, Decatur, Huntsville, or electric cooperatives that are owned by their own members and versus investor owned utility world in the rest of Alabama. It's a little bit of an oversimplification, but I think it's important for people to understand that public power entities like TVA, Athens, Decatur, Huntsville Utilities have been better and have been doing more on clean energy because I would argue they don't have a profit motive in what they're trying to do. And they can clearly see and more easily see the value of these things for their customers. And they're starting to make those types of investments in a faster and greater way.
There seems to be, and you talked about this about the jobs that this would create, but even knowing that if the transition to solar, building these, uh, implementing solar energy in Alabama would create jobs, it would help our economy. There still is, there still seems to be a lot of renewable energy skeptics in the state, and I know Twinkle Kavanaugh is no longer the Public Service Commission president. The impacts of her service will be felt for generations to come. And she said that Alabama needs to keep fighting for coal as a fuel. And she joked that solar power doesn't work on cold winter mornings when it's cloudy, even suggesting that solar farms would waste land that should grow crops. How do you respond to these kind of claims of these energy skeptics when they make statements like that?
Unfortunately, almost everything she said is just flat out false. There's a few things that I would respond to. One is that we have this magical technology. I don't know if you've heard of it or not, but it's called batteries. And batteries have this really cool feature where you can actually store energy in them and you can use it later. Again, new technology. A lot of people haven't heard of batteries before. Doesn't exist everywhere. Obviously, I'm joking. Batteries are absolutely everywhere and are being used on the grid in great effect, right? Especially in places like Texas, which is actually now the leader in both renewable energy and energy storage, like batteries, in order to solve this very problem. So, interesting about cold winter mornings, right, is that the peak that we're trying to solve for in terms of when everybody is running their heat really early in the morning is actually kind of a short time period, right? Batteries are quite well served to do this type of thing. So it's really just more of a head stuck in the sand, Luddite type of mentality from Twinkle Kavanaugh to say, well, solar doesn't work when the sun is not out and wind doesn't work when the wind's not blowing. Well, yeah, no doubt. That's exactly right. But we have other technologies that we use with renewable energy
Yep.
in order to help solve this problem. And together, those are cheaper than building things like new natural gas plants. Or for that matter, we can even, again, make investments in people's homes that are cheaper than building new gas plants. So there's a lot of ways to solve this problem. It's really just kind of more of a denial or a deference to whoever campaign donors are in order to say, well, I gotta, love coal or whatever. All right, fine. So the first of all, technically speaking, it's just not true. Second is what we did not do this in the most recent study, but there was a great study that was actually commissioned by the state of Tennessee's legislature, and it looked at this issue of land use because we see a lot of this. People are understandably a little worried about, hey, if things come into my community, what's it going to look like? What's it going to sound like? How's it going to operate? How many trucks are coming in and out? I don't want to live across the street from a 100-acre solar farm. How do these things work? There are, of course, things that developers and the state or regulators can do in order to protect customers, and we support those things. Having proper setbacks so that people aren't seeing this like right outside their front window or like right up to the edge of the property. There are lots of things that we can do to make sure this is done well, and most states are already doing this. This is not like we're the first state to ever worry about solar development. This has been figured out. But the state of Tennessee legislature study that I was referring to was really cool because it looked at what are the actual threats to rural farmland and what is eating up rural farmland more than anything. And let me tell you, solar was nowhere near the top of those lists, which is not really surprising if you just stop to think what is actually causing rural land loss. Urban growth, right? People are building houses, neighborhoods, subdivisions, things of this nature, and that's growing into areas that were prior or previously rural or they were farmland. And that's actually the number one thing that's causing an issue. So if you care about that issue, And I'm not saying that you shouldn't. You probably should. There are things that we need to do that have nothing to do with solar energy that actually help move the needle on that issue.
Yeah.
But even if we do want to take those concerns, and we do seriously, there are ways to do solar development responsibly that we advocate for to keep the character of the local land. And I'll tell you, when we go out there and talk to a lot of folks, listen, there are a lot of skeptics, but I think you would be, or a lot of people would be shocked to hear that the vast, vast majority of people that we talk to out in rural communities are big supporters of clean energy, because we have heard so many stories of people that have either made investments or want to make investments because it helps add new revenue to their farm. It helps them protect the land so that they can keep it in their families for generations and continue that tradition. There's a lot of good things that clean energy can bring to rural communities, and to paint it with this negative brush all at once is disingenuous, and frankly, I think a little insulting to the
Sure.
tens of thousands of people that are in rural communities and support this, and are being told that what they believe or what they view as a real positive benefit is all a hoax.
The work that you do and that Energy Alabama does is so, so important. We can't underscore that enough. And quite literally, it's life-saving work. I think it's been proven that y'all have saved lives through the work that y'all are doing. So I want you, as we round out this episode, I want you to talk about some of the successes legislatively, policy-wise, in the communities across Alabama that Energy Alabama has had in recent years.
Yeah, I think a few kind of really come to mind that we're quite proud of. First, going back a few years, early in COVID time, we made quite the big stink because Alabama Power and some other utilities in Alabama were, very slow as the entire economy shut down. Uh, they, for quite a while, refused to actually suspend disconnections for customers. And again, if people can remember this, like everybody went home, people weren't working. There was a few week period there where everything kind of shut down, and we were able to get Alabama Power to agree to suspend disconnections. Similarly, right around the COVID time as well, because of the lockdowns and a lot of the slowing of the economy, the prices of natural gas actually plummeted quite low. In some cases, it actually went negative, which is something that I had never seen before. And so, as a result, Alabama Power had over recovered from customers how much money it thought it was going to spend on fuel, and that was nothing that Alabama Power did wrong. It was just who could have foreseen that would happen. But nonetheless, it ended up with a balance of a few $100 million, if I recall correctly. And we sent a letter to the Public Service Commission and said, "Hey, Alabama Power has got a few $100 million sitting there that it collected, it doesn't need anymore. It over collected, and customers need it. Give the money back." And that actually happened. So that was one of the few times that we've been able to get the Public Service Commission to give money back to customers. And then, I think that we're really proud of continuing to push legislation to, ban disconnections for customers in certain time periods. Alabama Power has fought us on that. We're not saying that people shouldn't have to pay their bill. They should. We have lots of reasons and arguments why they're too high and want to bring those down. But
Yeah.
especially in times of really high heat, really cold weather, natural disasters and emergencies, we think that it should be frankly illegal to disconnect customers in those cases where it can literally be life and death. People can freeze to death in their own
Yeah.
homes. Um, so we continue to push for things like that. And then, the last thing I'll say, and this is not Alabama Power related, but just really, really proud, I think, of the work that some of our communities in Alabama have done. Specifically thinking of Huntsville, that has really taken a leadership role in pushing this forward. And I think making the difference between what is possible in Alabama versus what is happening in Alabama Power territory, that difference very stark. So, really kudos to those guys. Also, some other local utilities that are part of what's called the Alabama Municipal Electric Authority. So these are places like Opelika or Laverne or Lynette, small communities that have really been trying to make smart investments and reduce the burden for their residents. Again, I think those types of public power, owned by the local government or by their own members, have been faster to act. And I'm just so proud of those guys that have been really moving the needle and helping their folks and hopefully showing the rest of Alabama, places like Birmingham and Montgomery, what is possible when our communities act.
Yeah. What gives you hope and optimism for Alabama's energy future? And then conversely, what are some of the biggest barriers that we face that we have to overcome in order to make sure that Energy Alabama's vision for our future is, attained?
Well, I think one might be obvious if you've listened this far, right? And that is like the political behemoth of Alabama Power that essentially locks down and controls almost every lever of our government. I think most people know and understand that they're getting hosed. They even if you just get a high bill, you know that the system is not set up to serve regular people, and their control of the political system is deep and longstanding. So it's definitely a David versus Goliath fight in the sense of regular people, versus the Goliath of Alabama Power. But I have faith that we can do this and overcome that challenge. But I think that is the biggest issue that faces us, is fixing that political domination and control by Alabama Power. Beyond that, I would say that you know I think a big challenge for Alabama in terms of like how we make this transition is that we have to balance the investments that are going to be needed, both in generation, like new power plants and energy efficiency in people's homes. And I think a big challenge is that our grid is old.
Yeah.
We have a lot of stuff that just needs to be updated and upgraded, and unfortunately, those things cost money, and they need to be done in a way that doesn't exacerbate the already bad situation that people have. So we're very sensitive to that. Of how do you like upgrade the grid, frankly, without causing bills to skyrocket even more? And so that's a huge part of what our affordability platform and agenda is, of like we have to make these investments, but we need to make policy and regulatory changes so that they are actually affordable and help reduce bills rather than make them worse. And it's not an easy problem to solve. We're not the only state that's trying to solve a problem like that. It can be done, but it requires thoughtfulness and cooperation, and that's not always present in Alabama. So let's hope that we can get that changed.
Final question, Daniel, what are you not wrong about?
What am I not wrong about? I'm not wrong that customers are getting hosed by Alabama Power, that Alabama Power is making way too much money. It's been unchecked, it's been out of control for decades, and it's time to fix it.
You are not wrong about that. Listen, I made a promise to all of my followers on social media and to the listeners of this podcast that I was going to continue spreading information, education, bringing light to this issue that is the energy sector in Alabama and how it's affecting everyday citizens. And having you on is a continuation of upholding my end of that promise. This is just the first conversation of many to come over the next year. I'm hopeful that change can happen relatively quickly as people feel the pain of their power bills and realize what's in front of them. Hopefully, we'll be having you back on very soon to continue this conversation. Hopefully, we see change very soon. And we are so thankful for all the work that you are doing and that Energy Alabama is doing to bring awareness to these issues. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having us. We're really excited to be here. And thank you for continuing to help spread the word about this issue. It's really, I think, so amazing that we've seen so many people in recent months, regular folks in Alabama finally, understand what's at stake. They're getting these high bills and going, wow, how do we get a system that is this broken? So I'm really hopeful that at this particular moment in time that people are engaged enough to make a real difference in these policies and these issues that can help just millions of Alabamians. And so thank you for continuing to spread that word.